In this video, I wanted to share some of my thoughts regarding what I might refer to as a practical future for Torah keepers. Part of what I wanted to discuss includes the concept of waiting for Messiah, which I've witnessed in various schools of thought in some form or another. Instead of focusing on prophecies, I wanted us to consider the possibility of a transitionary phase, and I wanted us to think about a short-term and mid-term perspective. Obviously, everyone has different views on this, but it seems to be a fairly common view in one form or another that at some point there will be this massive shift in the world that will happen suddenly and abruptly, and it will cause a spontaneous change in everyone, or at least in all the faithful, that will involve no real input on our part and will essentially resolve all problems. I've read Jewish works in the past that seem to suggest such, and of course there's the Second Coming belief in the New Testament. Some have framed this anticipation as waiting for Messiah. People recognize there are problems in the world and they're hoping that Elohim will save them, or that Elohim will send someone else to save them. To be clear, I do believe that Elohim is involved today, and I do believe that he will be involved in the future change. But I am putting things in a somewhat cynical light because I think we should consider these ideas in more detail. Whenever Elohim sent Moses and Aaron to his people to be his messengers and to help enact his change, clearly they did have a significant impact on what was going on for his people at the time. The deliverance from their captivity was obviously a major change that could not have happened without Elohim's direct intervention. He sent plagues in various forms, and even with the plagues that could be looked at as relatively minor and non-lethal and hypothetically inconsequential, they still caused significant disruption, and he ultimately destroyed Pharaoh and his country through those means. Even though this was decisive change by the hand of Elohim, we can see how quickly his people resumed being people in Exodus 16. Even with the very obvious signs and the very obvious deliverance, as it has been observed plenty of times before, they were quick to resume their old behavior. Now, obviously I'm aware that in Deuteronomy 30 and in other passages that it refers to the hearts of the people being changed at some point in the future, and obviously that would be a major difference from the events of the Exodus and the wilderness. Even so, what I think we should consider is that maybe some other things need to happen before we can even get to that point of the hearts changing in that way. Maybe in order for things to go the way that Elohim has planned, whatever that plan may be, maybe there cannot be this instant shift from where we are now without some sort of transitionary phase. The way I see our current situation is that for a lot of us, we are just in our tiny little isolated groups where we are by ourselves with our individual beliefs. Maybe we have a family, maybe we don't. Maybe our family shares our beliefs, maybe they don't. Maybe we know that there are some people online that have some views like us, but maybe we don't really know them or interact with them. Maybe we have a group in our general area that we used to meet with, but now maybe we talk to them once a year or something like that. And maybe those people shared some of our beliefs, but at the same time, maybe they have different views on the calendar. Maybe they also observe some other things differently from us. Well, not everyone has the exact same situation, obviously, and while I would assume that there are some examples of larger communities, what comes to mind for me is the quote from Judges about how everyone is doing what is right in their own eyes. I don't mean that everyone is necessarily doing something that is bad, but generally speaking, I don't see a real overarching community in the way that we see the events taking place in the Torah, or the way that the Torah commands refer to. Among the people that have been scattered, sometimes we lose sight of the fact that the Torah is not just written to individuals, but is written to apply to a nation. And the current government, which occupies some of the land, even though it may derive some influence from the Torah, it does not actually have the Torah as its ultimate governing law. So to me it seems much like how it was put in Judges about how everyone is doing what is right in their own eyes. Right now that may or may not directly affect us. If we individually are doing whatever we think is right, and then we know someone in the area that has a different view on things, even though on some level we may want them to be on the same page as us, and even though we may believe that would be the right thing, we may not view it as actually affecting us directly. Maybe we are more careful about food than they are, or maybe we observe the calendar in a different way, or maybe we do the tassels command as we understand it, and maybe they don't do it at all. Practically speaking, at least in terms of our immediate perceptions and our immediate actions, all those differences may amount to is that we may not participate in certain things with them, and maybe we've discussed our interpretations with them, and maybe we've pointed out issues that we perceive, or maybe we've asked about or commented on the lack of observing the tassel command or others, but then after that maybe we decided to agree to disagree, or maybe we think to ourselves that even though we want to observe Leviticus 19:17, and even though we may think the difference is a clear textual one, we may not want to seem obnoxious or seem like one of those people that people don't like. Practically speaking, there may not be a lot of direct impacts from that overall situation to us personally, at least not apparently, and at least not right now. One thing that I want us to consider, though, is that things are not always going to stay the same. Historically speaking, things have always changed at some point in time, no matter how much people think that things are just going to stay the way that they've always been in the short period of time that they personally have known. In the near term, that inevitable change may not be going from today, where we're in our isolated bubbles debating on the internet, to tomorrow where everyone believes the right thing and we're all on the same page and all the children of Israel are going back to the land. It may not happen that way, and personally I don't believe that it will happen that way. Instead of just one day everything being finished and resolved for us, I'm pretty sure that before the restoration of Israel is complete, it is going to require a lot more input from us, and there are going to be a lot of challenges and difficult decisions along the way that may require us to do something that we haven't been inclined to do, and it may require us to do things differently from the way we've been doing things. Whenever I say all these things, I am also effectively saying this to myself too. I don't have the view that this is somehow not relevant to me, because I believe that this applies to me and to my thinking on this situation too. I still have a lot of ongoing questions that relate to these issues that I'm bringing up and that I will be bringing up, and I am still contemplating them. For me, right now, I'm living alone, I'm not involved in any local community, and outside of the activities on this channel, I don't have much personal contact with people regarding the Torah. In some ways, even though there certainly are things I don't like about the situation, I can also imagine how things could change, and there are ways that things could change that would make things a lot more complicated. Just think about the wilderness, think about the challenges that arose at that time. In some ways, that's a lot more complicated than the way things are now. As a thought experiment, just hypothetically speaking, not really considering the nature of any transition to this point, but just imagine completely hypothetically, someone in the future goes from living in a situation similar to what I described, and now the person in the future is living in a town or something like that, that actually recognizes the law, a place where the law is actually the law. Well, obviously I think that could be a good thing. I certainly don't have a utopian view of it. I wonder, would we even be able to step outside of this living in captivity mindset? Are all of us even capable of living in that kind of situation? As another hypothetical example, what if the future people decide that this isolation thing and this being scattered in tiny numbers all over the world is not really working the way we need it to? What if whatever future change that takes place ends up requiring us to change what we're doing? I don't necessarily mean that from the angle of thinking that we need more unity or that we just need to come to an agreement or something like that. I'm not referring to that. Looking at it even outside of the theological standpoint, I'm sure that some of you are aware of Maslow's hierarchy, and if you're not, you can easily search for it. What if the future situation demands that we make some changes just in order to satisfy the bottom two levels of Maslow's hierarchy? What would we do? What would you do? Hypothetically, I think these are things that we might consider and think through before we truly need to. Depending on the nature of the change, it may be one of those things that the only real opportunity to think things through and to adequately address that possibility is before that change happens. So my ultimate point is that while I believe Elohim is certainly involved in things, that doesn't necessarily mean that he expects us to not be involved. I think there are some complicated issues along the way to that sort of future that do not have easy answers to them and cannot be resolved in the way that we commonly think about things now. In response, I think we need to be seeking out his wisdom, because there are changes that we individually and as a group will eventually have to make.